poetry isn't something I've ever had any real skills with. I'm not very good at composing poetry, and I'm not even that good at recognizing when someone uses poetic elements. Sometimes, when I'm reading through Matthew in Hebrew, I think I pick up on something poetic, but I don't really have the skills or even the vocabulary to describe what I hear or confirm that it's really there. Most of the time, I leave those elements to one side, trusting that if they're real, future generations will recognize them and describe them in better detail than I ever could. However, some of them do have bearing on some points worth a more detailed explanation. One of the things that I've been criticized for is my claim that Hebrew Matthew doesn't actually solve any of our current text critical concerns in Matthew. Once you incorporate the Paris Manuscript, the Harley Manuscript, and Münster's and Johannes Quinquarboreus' editions of Matthew, no matter how you decide to weigh those texts, you're going to end up with something remarkably close to the Greek editions. There are cases where single manuscripts diverge one way or another, and there are a few readings that are different but only in such a way as to show that the translator to Greek adjusted readings to match what he remembered from Mark and Luke. Part of the reason this is true is that there just aren't all that many text critical concerns in Matthew that would survive translation between Hebrew, Greek, and English. Word order concerns make for fun ways to hone the text critic skills, but at the end of the day neither Hebrew nor Greek are altogether as concerned about word order as English is. There is one difference, however, that anyone aware of text critical concerns will know from Matthew, and it isn't just a matter of word order. That is the doxology on the Lord's Prayer. It's reasonable to assume that with such a small number of manuscripts, the doxology would either be there or not be there. As with the Greek edition, it is overwhelmingly there. It's notably absent from Shem Tov, but Shem Tov kind of famously skips things he doesn't think are relevant to the points he's trying to make, so that doesn't hold a lot of weight. All the other manuscripts and editions have it. But that's where it gets weird. They all have it, but it's not all the same. In Münster's edition, it ends in forever. In Johannes Quinquarboreus' edition, it ends in forever and ever. In the Paris Manuscript, it's forever and ever and ever. One is left to wonder how far this expansion could continue. Then there's a variation on power. In the Paris Manuscript and Shem Tov, it's the power, whereas in the others the article is absent. There are two ways to spell kingdom in Hebrew, and both of them are represented in the tradition. If you're keeping count with me, this is 5 or 6 words that are different in a section that only contains 7 or 8 words. The whole rest of the Lord's Prayer only has about 4 words of variation across the Hebrew Matthew tradition. So all of a sudden, the fact that it's missing from Shem Tov and early Greek manuscripts starts to seem a little more compelling. I want to make it clear, I'm not a text critic and I don't play one on television. I set rules for how I'm deciding what to mark in what way in the text I release, and by those rules the doxology survived. I'm just saying that I don't hold a strong confidence that it would survive the more rigorous and comprehensive examination of a more competent textual critic doing anything more than a very simple weight and count. My attempts at correcting the text of the Paris Manuscript against other members of the family were originally intended to produce a text that was abnormal and give me a chance to say, and this is why we don't leave text criticism to the amateurs. Instead, even my base and grossly oversimplified techniques smoothed out the rough spots and produced a text that had fewer anomalous readings. So now I say, see, even a rank amateur like me can make great improvements with a very basic algorithm. Just imagine what real professionals can do. There's something else about the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew that strikes me though. There's a sort of a rhythm to it. It's hard for me to describe, but when I memorized it I definitely noticed it. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the doxology to fit with the rhythm. Now, that could be my lack of skills as a poet or the fact that I'm self-taught in Hebrew or some combination of the two, and that's why no part of this makes it into the more formal defense of Matthew in Hebrew. But today I'm going to try, briefly, to explain what I see there in Hebrew. I also want to note that even though I don't speak any Aramaic, when I hear the Lord's Prayer sung in Aramaic, I think it is beautiful, and I fully acknowledge that it may have even more poetic elements in Aramaic. This is less about the original language of Matthew, and more about how I think the Hebrew Matthew family I draw from tries to draw in the doxology, and it doesn't really work. Looking at the Lord's Prayer, there are phrases that each divide neatly in half. They aren't all on the boundaries of the verses, but they are definitely there. The first verse of the Lord's Prayer divides evenly in half, with each half getting 2 words in Hebrew. Our Father which is in heaven. May your name be sanctified. Then the next verse has 3 sections, each one with 2 words. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. As in heaven and in earth. The next verse splits evenly into 2 sections with 3 words each. Our continual bread. Give us today. The next verse has 2 sections, each with 4 words. This is the closest the pattern comes to being broken because there's a hinge conjunction between the two sections. And forgive us our debts,
just as
we forgive the masters of our debts. The first half of the next verse again splits into two sections with 4 words each.
And don't lead us to a test,
but deliver us from all evil. And then there's the doxology. Without the amen, it's 6 words, which you would think can be divided up into either 2 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 2.
But they don't feel right either way.
I'm sure that someone with more poetic experience will have terms for all of this, but let me just lay out each of them and I'm sure most people will see what I mean. First, if I lay them out as 2 sets of 3.
For to you is the kingdom,
and power and glory forever.
That doesn't feel right.
It feels like kingdom and power and glory should go together. So let's look at it the other way and see how that looks.
For to you is the kingdom and power and glory forever.
Now it splits power and glory. So either way, it doesn't really work. And adding in extra sets of ever or an article here or there doesn't help. Some text critics are slow to consider internal elements like this. While I don't feel practiced enough in text criticism to offer a real opinion on whether these kinds of elements are really convincing or not, I don't think the evidential value is 0. I think that when the other factors, such as early Greek manuscripts omitting the doxology and Shem Tov omitting the doxology and the wide array of readings in the doxology and on get added together, this last little bit might just be one unnecessary nail in that coffin. Or more experienced textual critics might say that the doxology really does have the same poetic value in Aramaic, and say that it's amazing how well Matthew was able to render as much of it as he did with a poetic structure, and the doxology is simply where that skill met its match. I leave that decision up to those with greater skills and fewer impositions upon their working time to finally resolve.